And good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on when you're watching. We are live on LinkedIn on this May 26th, 2026. I'm Marion Spears Carr, and this is the Healthcare Leadership Show, my semi-weekly show where I introduce and interview amazing thought leaders within my practice, within my network, and within my group of colleagues, talking about different topics related to healthcare, the industry, the healthcare leadership in those spaces. And today I have a really close friend of mine, a gentleman named Doug Gregory from Aegis Health Services. He's a senior vice president there. And today we're going to be talking about from test to treatment, responding to the CRUSH request for information that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid put out. And Doug, welcome to the show. We get to work together fractionally at Aegis, and we've known each other for years. Introduce yourself a little bit better to the audience and talk a little bit more about why this topic is so important.
Yeah, no, thank you, Marion, and thank you for having me on, and always a pleasure. We have been friends for years through the ACHE and other initiatives, and so it's honestly great to have a network like the one I've got, because if you do have questions, there's always somebody you can bounce an idea off of. So, as Marion said, my name is Doug Gregory. I'm the Executive Vice President of Business Development here at Aegis. By way of career, I began my career as a nurse and clinician, and then kind of came up the inpatient healthcare side administratively, and that's what really helps me here with what we're trying to do with Aegis. So that's my role, and bridging that clinical need with both the payers, the clinicians, and then our lab partners to make sure that we are providing amazing patient care, while really trying to shift the paradigm, right, with lab interpretation. So what we do at Aegis is we are a molecular pathology practice, and we provide interpretation, clinician-led interpretation for complex molecular diagnostics, right? So think of us as a fledgling subspecialty akin to radiology, or even now other service lines are adopting the same modalities, right? So my heart and vascular background, which is most of my career, we now have fellowship trained and board certified cardiac diagnostics physicians, right? That's their specialty.
Mm-hmm.
Even that specialty has progressed beyond what a radiologist can do when it comes to heart and vascular, right? So as we continue to specialize, we've got to continue to narrow focuses so that we've got experts that can make these complex tests usable for the end user and impact patient care. And that's exactly what the CRUSH RFI is trying to do. And we won't agree with every piece of it, but I do understand, the intent behind it, which is, the government, CMS in particular, right? But then we all know the commercial payers will follow suit.
Mm-hmm.
They believe in the science behind molecular diagnostics, right? PCR, PGX being the two major, and then next gen sequencing as well. They believe in the science behind that. What they haven't necessarily seen is the utilization and impacts of patient care, right?
Mm-hmm.
You order this test, it can be pricey, but the cost avoidance is high, right? As well as the end cost of treatment is also lessons, right? Because you can provide antibiotic stewardship, targeted therapy, much quicker response times, and more accurate treatment regimens. But you have to take this information and use it for the patient care, right? And that's where we come in. We take 20 to 50 pages of genetic data and have a clinician where we give recommendations just like a radiologist would, but very succinctly, right? So this is the bug, this is the drug, right? We take it down to that level so that the treating providers then have actionable intelligence that they can take and influence the patient care.
Appreciate you laying the groundwork of what the work that y'all are doing at Aegis and related to this request for information and what the legislative people are trying to address. First, if you're watching live, and some of you have already jumped on, my regulars are doing it, let us know in the comments if you're watching live or if you're watching the replay. We check those comments even after the replay. Click like and share these with you. John Welling checking in from Dallas, Texas. Good to see you, John. Kelly Johnson checking in from Madison, Georgia. Kelly, thanks for being here. Again, if you have questions, if you're watching live, post those in the comments and we'll interact with you. One of the things that when I started working with you guys in on a fractional basis to help scale and work with you in the business development side is understanding that the impact that molecular diagnostics can have in supporting clinicians, growing them in terms of the quality of care that they deliver. And this is kind of the center of what we're talking about. What do you feel like is like the main concern right now of legislators as they look at this RFI and look at trying to address fraud, potential fraud? When it comes to specifically this level of diagnostic care, you hit on it a little bit in your description, but can you maybe go a little bit deeper about what do you see is their potential concern? And then how are you addressing that?
Yeah, so we have a tagline from test to treatment, right? It's actually part of the title, and that really is the best summary of how we're addressing that. Because again, their concerns, with all things, cost is always a concern, but their concern is the utilization, right? So, or the overutilization with the lack of patient impact is probably the better way to put that. So ultimately, they're looking at reimbursement, as always, right? They're also looking at how the impact is the patient care, right? So meeting that medical necessity and then documenting that, right? So I ordered this test because of this. I took this information and this is how it impacted patient care, right? You've got to be able to draw that line through it. And right now, the current iterations of the reporting just don't address that. And so we've taken the approach where we do it as an independent third-party medical practice, very similar to radiology, right? So with that imaging example, say your physician wants you to get a CT scan. You have a choice of where you get that CT scan, but then that's the technical portion, right? That's the actual getting the imaging. And then you need to have a specialist, a radiologist, do that interpretation of those images. We do that from the molecular standpoint, the genetic standpoint.
When I've been learning and again working with you guys and we've talking to the clinicians out there, particularly physicians, they're overwhelmed, right? They're with a lot of data, a lot of information. And one of the things I've been really impressed by is how your team is really, partners with them. But as we think about this particular area of focus, what happens when this highly complex molecular data reaches them if they're doing that type of testing, if they're doing molecular diagnostic work or ordering those tests, what happens when that data reaches the clinicians, let's face it, are pretty overloaded? And kind of what's the answer? What's the result? How do y'all address that?
So it's a couple of different factors. So number one, it's task overload, and every clinician out there is faced with it, right? They can't, you add one more click, you've got to take a click away. They are just task saturated, right? And they all got into this to focus on patient care, not on treating a computer. So a 50-page report is just not going to work. Number two is a little bit of defensive medicine. If they don't have the advanced training to interpret that 50 pages worth of data and then make it a meaningful impact for the patient, they're going to avoid it and then move back to their old standby, right? They just don't want the risk. They don't want the risk of, not providing the best care for a patient. They don't want the risk of litigation. And so we function as a consultative practice, right? And that's how we answer that. So we give the succinct, if this, do that, right, type of advice to these physicians. We're not a prescriber. We don't dictate what they do, but we give them our advice, right? So there's back to radiology, right? We're going to tell you have a broken leg. We're not going to tell the doctor how to fix the leg, right? But we are available 24/7, and that's part of being a consult based physician practice, is that if that physician doesn't want to talk it through with a clinician, they have that ability 24/7 to give us a call. We've got somebody on call off hours, and our clinicians are available during regular business hours, and they can talk through the rest of that case if they need to. But most of the time, our very succinct 2-page report gives them what they need and gives them the guidance they need, while having the assurance that it's medically safe practice and the right thing to do, because it is clinic to clinic, MD to MD.
Shout out to other people in the audience, and I love that they're here. Gina checking in from Gray, Georgia. Looking forward to learning more about the Crush RFI. She's checking in on that. Michael Young is checking in from San Diego. Michael is an expert in the world of pharmacy and pharmacy development. Pharmacogenetics is probably an area that he's worked. I'm glad to have him in the audience. Glad to have you there, Michael. So one of the things that the RFI is addressing, and you sent me a lot of information, I've been reading on it too, is and you mentioned this earlier, overutilization or misutilization from a reimbursement perspective. But so when we think about it from that perspective, how would you define, like, what is clinical utility? Because it really comes down to, do we need this? Are we utilizing the services, particularly, again, we're talking about molecular diagnostics specifically, but overall, how would you define clinical utility, and what are the frameworks around that?
So, yeah, the easiest definition of clinical utility is, does it drive patient care, right? Does it impact your decision making for the patient care? And sometimes it's negative, right? But you need to know it's a negative, right? And otherwise, it's a positive, and I should use this antibiotic. Or in the case of pharmacogenetics, it's what medications you're are going to work for you based on your own genetics, right? Which medications are at risk? Are you slow metabolizer, rapid metabolizer? There's all sorts of different factors that we can take into consideration when it comes to that. But it really comes down to, I've made this decision, I've ordered this test, this is how it's going to impact patient care. And where the guardrails come into place, and we've all seen it throughout our history in healthcare, is you end up with a new technology that gets ordered, you see a huge ramp in it, but a lack of outcomes that come with it, right? So the science behind it is amazing. We know it works, but then you can't pair the outcomes with the ordering patterns, and that becomes a red flag. And I think that's where we've hit with molecular, right? So people are ordering it, their intentions are the best, but there's no documentation of what we did with it. And we do provide that with our guidance, and then lead the physicians to writing their notes. One of the pieces of the Crush initiative, and this is one I don't necessarily agree with, I don't have an answer for it either, is they're actually asking the lab providers to document the medical necessity, right? And I think that puts lab providers in a untenable situation, as well as there's some risk there. They're not medical doctors, right? Even being a nurse, but I always saw this as when I was more administrative, but who am I to tell a physician what they need to do to excel in patient care, right? And so this is kind of putting the labs in that position where it's up to them to deny, performing the test or not, based off whether you can document that medical necessity. I think that's a piece that really needs looked at. Everything else I really do agree with on it, and that's documenting, the outcomes, right? We did this, in the case of PCR, within a few hours, you can know, versus 5 to 7 days. And with a culture, you can know what bug is pathogenic, right, causing the problem, and which antibiotics would treat it. So amazing versus where it's 5 days out for culture and sensitivity. You start that patient on broad spectrum antibiotics, which leads to antibiotic resistance, and then switch to a more targeted antibiotic once that sensitivity comes back. So this not only helps that existing patient, it helps the population as a whole when it comes to antibiotic stewardship. The less we use broad spectrum, the longer they're going to be there for us in a you know in an emergency, right? A pandemic again. We've all
Mhm.
come through that, right? This one happened to be viral, the next one could be bacterial. And so, we need to be good stewards of our antibiotics. They're just not new ones coming, right? And the more resistance we create, the less effective they are. So, it's important both from a fiscal, a direct patient care, and a population health standpoint that we get these things right and we start improving care.
Yeah, I love that. And so I want to kind of like let's jump back. I want to talk about that a little bit more. I want to come back to more about what the intent of the Crush RFI and related to this. But I love what you just talked about, because one of the things that, that has stood out to me as I've learned more about the work that we're doing and you're doing at Aegis and the team there is this shortening of the amount of time it takes to get the patient, as you said, on a very specific treatment protocol that's going to address their current situation much faster, obviously have better outcomes. But one of the things I've learned too, it also, when we think about what Medicare is trying to do is reduce cost, and one of the biggest things that you do is keep people from going back to the hospital, right? If we can address their situation quicker with more targeted treatment protocols, they are less likely to go back in the hospital. And there's where talking about being great stewards of the service delivery of care for that patient. Talk a little bit about that. I know that's a little bit off from what our topic, but it really, to me, it ties into what they're trying to achieve is ultimately they're trying to save money, but also get the patients in the best position possible. But that's one of the things I think you should highlight.
Yeah, no, and so with PCR, which is the molecular test for bacteria, right? So basically, you're
Mm,
taking the DNA of the bacteria, not our own DNA. And so, similar with pharmacogenetics, where you're saying, hey, based on your DNA, this is what works. We're
right.
saying, hey, based on the bacteria's DNA, this is what doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for the
Got
bacteria,
it.
kill it. And so, we actually turn that interpretation around within 2 hours of receiving the test result, oftentimes 30 minutes or less, which means that theoretically you can go home and your provider call you in an antibiotic to pick up a few hours later without having to start that broad spectrum, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one piece of it. Number two, with that targeted therapy, you're going to get better faster, and that's going to lead to less ER admissions, right? ED admissions. Now, a big population that we serve is long-term care. And so a lot of
Mm,
catheter usage, a lot of persistent UTI, a lot of persistent wound. The use of PCR has given us the ability to target these pathogens much better and actually get the healing, get rid of the UTI, right? Like they're reoccurring, they're persistent, they've thrown every antibiotic they can at it. We use that antibiotics DNA against itself and find the right path um, to treat that patient. And what that means is huge savings from the health system as a whole. You're not getting the ED admission, and then the patient, getting admitted for the IV antibiotics and the things where they've got to be in the hospital for the long-term care. They're not having to leave a bed empty, right, which doesn't reimburse for them, and their kind of margins aren't great anyway, right? And
mm-hmm.
long-term care is something we need as a population, right? So we've got to keep these guys in business, and it's just better patient care. I mean, we talk about the financial impacts of a lot of these different initiatives because it is a business, right? In order to help people, we have to make money, and we tend to sometimes lose a little perspective. But when you take a second, step back and look at the work we do, it impacts those patients so much. There is a life on the end of every one of these tests, right? And so it seems like data flowing back and forth from computers and people giving their input, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
real impact to patient care by adopting these technologies. I mean, again, I'm lucky that that I was in a position to be able to join Aegis because I could see where the future was going. And some of that I saw in my heart and vascular background with, if you think about the history of healthcare, what used to be a
Mhm.
surgery became a procedure, and what used to be a procedure became a pill, and what used to be a pill, we've got lifestyle modifications for, right? And every disease
Mhm.
kind of goes through that as we get better at it. We're kind of at that point where in cardiology, we move from taking people to the cath lab to doing more CTAs. Non-invasive, it's better for it. And then if they do need to go to the cath lab, you can pinpoint exactly where you're going. They get less radiation, less contrast, and less risk, right? But you got to buy more CT scanners. You got to have the doctors that can interpret those, right?
Yeah.
So it's always an evolution, not a revolution, when we see healthcare, and we know healthcare is not quick adopters of anything. We're overly cautious by nature,
Yeah.
and so I just feel like that's the point in time we are with molecular diagnostics, right? We're right at that tipping point. Aegis is ahead of it because of the way we've stood it up as a medical practice and then treating it as a subspecialty.
Yeah.
We get to be that independent third party for both, our lab partners and our provider partner. And not only do we help validate the need and provide treatment guidance, but again, we're that independent third party where if there's not a need, we're going to be like, no, they don't need this test. We recommend this, right? And so that's the other thing that, the Crush looks at, the CMS wants to look at is, when it comes to compliance, where is that independence? Where's that line drawn where
Mhm.
you've got that kind of separation of church and state, if you will, and we provide that for our partner. So, and I use the word partner very deliberately because we have no business relationship with any of our partners. It's truly as a partnership so that we can have access to these patients and provide the care that they deserve. So,
And one of the things I love, Doug, and you've been around the show. We've known each other for a long time. You've seen the healthcare. You've been involved with this show too, and is that in our comments where there's always another show going on that also supports the information that we're providing, and if you have a chance, everyone that's watching, check out that comment from Michael Young, um, talking about how prescribing broad spectrum antibiotics is going to be a hard habit to break. And with PCR, even with PCR, in that we have to keep going, he says. He's encouraging you to keep driving down this train. And there's a really great comment there. So, Michael, thank you for that comment. I didn't want to bring it up on screen because it's so long, but there's so much impact in that. But it's talking about what you were talking about. We have to change the mindset. For example, you mentioned earlier the example of radiology. Is like now that's changed dramatically how the radiologist plays in terms of treatment patterns and those type of things. And that's where you're going, where Aegis is going, where we're going with this. Gina has a question. I'm gonna come back to the Crush RFI topic, but this is an interesting question around just, I think it's an important question. Does the PCR replace culture and sensitivity? I'm just curious on a thank you for that question, Gina, because that's a question I have. I don't have a medical background, so I'm learning. So this is a really good question. Thanks for bringing that up.
yeah, so not completely. So it
Okay.
does replace it in most applications, but again, it is a standard for a reason. It works. It's just the timeliness piece of it is huge. Um, and there will still be times that we actually recommend a culture and sensitivity. There's times when we recommend you do a culture and sensitivity to back up our PCR, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, PCR should move to the standard, right? As access increases, um, we never say never and we never say always, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, there's still a definite use for it. It's still a very cost effective way to do this, especially if, it's your first time you've had a UTI and you can afford to wait. Like there's a whole criteria to meet the medical necessity for molecular.
Mhm.
But it will move to the standard of care, especially as cost comes down.
And for those of you who are watching, and today's topic is around the Crush RFI, and I thought maybe it might be important for us because we're going to talk about governance now. Is what the acronym stands for: Comprehensive Regulations to Uncover Suspicious Healthcare. And this is an initiative that it was launched by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and it's a request for information. They're really digging deep here, and really at the heart of this, Doug, is that you and I've talked about is around governance of all healthcare delivery. But when we think about governance related to molecular medicine, what is that? Why does that matter? Why is that so important?
I mean, I think it touched back on some of the other things that we've shared during the show, but you've got to have the
Yeah.
guardrails, right? And that's where the governance comes in, and it's something we're just good at in healthcare now. The bigger issue is again when governance becomes a burden and you end up having to when people feel like they have to work around it versus through it, right? It's time to
Yeah.
read what that governance structure looks like. And I think we've gotten to that point in some ways. And that's just a byproduct of bureaucracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a necessary component, right? If you don't, then the dollars will just, you know, you'll see utilization without effect go through the roof, right? And we have, right? We've seen this, think of the COVID when PCR first hit Maine and everybody had to do daily testing. There was a lab on every corner. It was pretty easy to ramp up. And then a bunch of these companies went out of business at the end of COVID, and they're still under a great deal of scrutiny now, right? A lot of people in orange because they saw a dollar to be made, right? So unfortunately, I love to believe that everybody operates at the highest levels of integrity and ethics. That's just a naive viewpoint. That's not the case, right? So anytime you've got a new
Mm-hmm.
technology that's a little bit under regulated, people are going to take advantage. Now, I am happy to say those people are getting fewer and far between. We've been able to screen those people out and not partner with them when we do partner with labs, and all the labs
Mm-hmm.
we partner with have the highest levels of integrity and ethics and are just as worried about these things as we are. And so, as an industry, I always come back. This was my last startup. We did radiation protection for cath labs, and it was amazing. We
Mm-hmm.
created a whole new industry, kind of like we're doing now, but we really took a deliberate path to policing ourselves so that we didn't have to get policed, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
all the competitors coming together, starting a association around radiation safety and fluoro suites, right? Um, Not for profit, where we could write rules and opinions and things like that all together, and everybody having a voice at that table. And so I think to a certain extent that ship's already sailed on the lab side. Um, but it is coming back for a circle, and we're seeing that. But you're seeing an amazing level of scrutiny into the lab space by CMS and attorneys general. So
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that, sharing that, and to wrap this thing up, we and you hit on it a little bit with responding to Gina Tipton's question, but so what's the future look like for molecular medicine, and then how can the audience engage and learn more? That's the two questions as we wrap up. So what do you see as the future, Doug? And then how can they connect with you? How can they learn more about how to partner with Aegis? How can they learn to connect? And by the way, you can reach out to me and I can make those introductions as well. Doug, what's the future look like and how can they connect with you?
yeah, so I think the easiest way to connect with me is through you, Marion, or I'm
Okay.
happy to share my email and phone number, and happy to take anybody's call. I
Yep.
will warn you, the spam blockage is in full force. So if I don't
Okay.
have your number, shoot me a text or something and let me know your call so I save it in there. But with that, the future. So the future with PCR is going to be a little bit of a curve, and an upside down bell curve is kind of the way I see it. So
Yeah.
with the scrutiny, What I think we're going to see is a contraction in the molecular market, but we're going to see that market share split between fewer but larger ethical players that are putting all this work in on the front end to make sure that they're very compliant, they're prepared, they've got the science and the processes in place to meet the initiative should it become ratified, which we know in some way, shape, or form it will be. Maybe not as written, but we know it will be. Now, with that, you're going to see that market share split. We're going to see contraction in the number of players. Here at Aegis, we think we're poised to and we've been growing at a very rapid pace over the last several months, and we think that will continue because of our business model is very supportive and already compliant with all of these things, right? We built it that way from the start. So we see a lot of that happening. Now, overall, molecular is going to be the future of pretty much any of these labs that it affects, any diagnostics that have a molecular option. You're going to see much wider adoption, price compression. It's going to get cheaper the more we do it, right? As with anything. And you're going to see it adopted, to like what Michael was saying. Like there's already some point of care coming, right? And that's going to be huge. Or Michael, if you've got practices, we can partner directly with any practice or provider that's out there through our portal or an EHR integration where we don't necessarily have to go through the lab. We can be lab agnostic. So if they've got a local lab with a turnaround time they like, we can still provide our interpretation to them directly. Right now, we mostly partner with labs because that's how we get our results is through an integration with the labs. But we can do that directly. Or if they want to know a lab that works with us, we've got that information too. We can give them a couple options to pick from. So we've got several urgent cares that do right, as Michael says, where they turn it around. They're actually physician-owned labs, so they run their own molecular. And then they turn around, they send it to us, and 30 minutes later, we have the result back to them. We put them as a priority because they're urgent cares or emergency departments so that they can get that tested treatment. With a regular clinic, it's in their inbox by 9 a.m. the next morning. So,
outstanding, Doug. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you again for partnering with me. Allow me also to have a part in, be it somewhat small, in how Aegis is growing. For those of you who are watching the show for the very first time, this is the Healthcare Leadership Show. My name is Marion Spears Carr. I'm the founding partner for a company called Inflow Executives. We're an executive search and leadership solutions business development company that works in the space of healthcare. We're really glad to help companies grow and scale, particularly ones that are making a difference, and like Aegis, truly making a difference in the marketplace. Stay tuned for new shows coming up. Each month we'll be featuring, over the next few months, we'll be featuring another topic related to what work's being done at Aegis. It'll always be this week, the last week of the month, or the fourth week of the month. And we're glad to entertain your questions and comments in the chat. Glad to have you here. Doug, thank you so much. We're going to shut her down for today, but we really do appreciate everyone joining us this week. Have a great day.
Thanks, Marion. Thank you, everybody.